Finance Committee to order. I'd like to remind all of those at the tables to please speak clearly into the microphones, and also that we are being recorded for those listening at home. So it's for everyone's benefit. So the first order of business on this evening's agenda is minutes as available. I don't believe we have any minutes this evening. Am I correct? What do we have? January 23rd was distributed?
Before the meeting?
No, I don't believe it was distributed. No. No. I think it's still out for review. I don't think we have a, we don't,
It's finished, but it may not have been sent.
I don't believe it's been distributed for everybody's view. So I don't think we have anything. I did see that come across, but it was only to me and a couple of other people,
Yeah,
including
I
you.
edited it.
That's fine, but it still hasn't gone widely. Okay, so our next order of business is a visit from the planning board, who are gonna, Matt Johnson is here to introduce the articles from the planning board, so we'd love to hear from you.
And I guess there's not really a way for me to display anything.
I believe we can effort that if you'd like,
Okay.
you know.
We may or may not need to. I will have little crib notes here, though.
Okay. If you'd like us to make an effort to put something up, I'm sure we can.
Let's
Okay.
try without.
All right. Just please introduce yourself, because I.
Sure. I'm Matt Johnson of 21 Winthrop Street, but I'm also chair of the planning board. And so I'm here because I think you're likely to want to take positions on a couple of our warrant articles because they change zoning for housing in the town that could have some financial impacts. But I actually think that they're going to be very light. But that's for you to
fair
decide.
enough. Okay.
So let's just see if I get in here. So there are 8 articles that we're bringing to town meeting, but of the 8, I would assert that only the first 2, number 32 and number 33, which are both dealing with the same part of our bylaw about creating an additional dwelling unit, are the ones that have any kind of material impact. All the others, things like changing the permit granting authority for hammerhead lots from the ZBA to the planning board, clarifying that you can park a trailer on your property as long as it's, something that has a license plate on it and could be moved. Things, and it's not used for habitation. Moving the boundary line of the Thoreau Depot Business District out so that Starbucks can put a driveway behind their building. These are kinds of things that I don't think the Finance Committee really cares to weigh in on. Even the one that we have about the planned residential developments, which is number 34, where we are increasing the open space requirements, increasing the sustainability requirements for PRDs, and changing the kinds of bonus opportunities that there are for getting more density. So today you can get more density with additional affordable housing units, or providing, well, actually just that, but now we are adding things like if you make the units small-sized units, or if you make most of them accessible in terms of, 0-step entries and all of that, then we would allow some more bonus units, but we don't specify how many. Okay. So I don't think that any of those, it would be quite speculative that would have any real big impact on the number of future units generated. However, the accessory dwelling units bylaw, so I don't know if I should transition now to just
That's
talking
fine.
about
I think
those
it's
two.
totally appropriate.
What it does is today you can put an accessory dwelling unit in your house, but it's pretty highly restrictive. You have to purchase the house a couple years before, not made any changes, And then you can carve out just from your main unit, space up to a third of the space and make that an accessory dwelling. Now, once you do that though, if you ever sell your house, and you have to get a special permit from the ZBA for it. And then if you sell your house, it doesn't that permit does not go with the house. The next owner would have to reapply for the special permit. So it's clearly not incenting people or even very often allowing people to put these units into place in the kinds of scenarios like you buy a house and you want to have this accessory dwelling, you have to wait in most cases. So what we've done in following both the advice of the comprehensive long-range plan, but also some work that's been done or in the region about trying to improve housing choice or housing diversity in suburban areas around Boston, is to create a much simpler process where up to a 750 square foot unit could be built by right. And it could be either within the main unit of the house, or it could be in an outbuilding. So you could put an accessory dwelling over a garage, or you could put it in, a barn.
An existing outbuilding.
You can also construct a new one. However, what we've done is in the by right case, you have to put it within the setback area of the houses. And if you're going to convert a building that's already outside the setback, then you have to get a special permit from the ZBA for that. The
So
maximum
Matt,
size.
you could change the footprint then, is that what you're saying?
Yes, you could change the footprint, but you still have to fulfill all of the dimensional requirements of the zoning district. So, setbacks, height, floor area ratio, all those things. The maximum size that you could do by right would be 750 square feet. Now, by special permit, and it has to be on a conforming lot, but in any residential district of town. But if you have a non-conforming lot, you don't meet the minimum size requirements of the district. If you want to make a little bit bigger accessory dwelling, up to 1,000 square feet is the absolute limit. But if you go above 750 and up to 1,000, or if you want to put it in the setback area, as I mentioned before, you can get a special permit from the ZBA to do that.
Is that transferable to the next owner?
And in this case, now all the special permit is transferable. Okay, so, the objective here is that since household sizes are decreasing, people want to age in place. Some people, in order to, share the burdens of the costs of home ownership, especially in Concord, might want to downsize into an accessory unit and then rent out the big unit, or just rent out a small unit to somebody. They would be able to do so. But the new unit of housing that would be created would be 1,000 square feet or less. Okay?
How does the floor area ratio play when you're talking about adding livable space in an outbuilding? What's the situation
floor
there?
area ratio is based upon the kind of visual aspects
Right.
of the space. So if you're adding you're putting a second story on a garage, that's going to increase the floor area ratio for your lot.
For the whole lot?
For the whole lot, yes. So that's how it's calculated. It's calculated not just, any outbuilding more than 250 square feet would count. And I think most of these would be
Right, sure.
more than that. We talk about tiny houses, but, by the way, you couldn't have a tiny house on a trailer.
Oh, you
That's the
can't.
trailer.
Okay.
That would be
Oh,
a
you
inhabited
No trailer.
Yeah.
So
You
can,
can have a very tiny,
you can have a tiny
accessory
house
dwelling.
though, right? Can't you,
could have-
even if it has wheels on it, you can have a tiny house? Or does it
No.
have to be a
Beyond
structure?
blocks.
You
it
have
has
to
to be a
have
structure. It has to be like on the ground
Okay,
foundation.
so you can't have like RVs there.
No,
Unless you
an
have a
RV,
license
you
plate.
can park your RV,
But you
and that's
can't
another
habitate.
thing in our bylaw, that we're changing this time.
That's what this
But-
other one is. You
But
can't
you
habitate.
can't live
Trailer.
in
Can't
your
live in the
parked
bar-
It's,
RV.
it's the
That's
other one.
what we're trying to be very clear about.
So,
Not even
No, I think maybe you could get away with overnight.
So the number of cars in parking, so for this The accessory dwelling would have to have at least one
I think it might be
dedicated
this
parking spot,
thing.
but
Something,
that's
one
it.
of these things,
Just
they
one.
literally have wording.
Does this change the assessed value of the property once it's added?
So I would assume, and I have not done the study on assessed values, but there are accessory dwellings in town
Yes.
today. And so
Yes.
you could, I think, it might be interesting on a per square footage basis or something to calculate what the property tax impact would be. Because I think there are really two big buckets of potential impact. One is property tax impact.
Right.
The other is school children.
Services, right.
Services impact. And the services impact, I think the other services are pretty modest relative to the potential impact of school children, is my guess. I have a couple of statistics relative to the accessory dwelling units in terms of the existing ones that there are. And so let me try to.
Sorry, Matt. Matt, can I just ask, you're calling it accessory dwelling unit, and the Warren article says additional dwelling
So there's
unit.
a
Is that the same thing?
section of our bylaw called additional dwelling unit, and there are two subsections. One subsection is about this, the accessory dwellings, and the other subsection is about two families, which we'll get to in a minute. So each of them creates an additional dwelling unit on a lot. That's why it's called that.
Just, well, for a little context, is this an amendment to, like, there are several clauses in the zoning for additional dwelling units? Is this an amendment to one of those, or is this a whole new?
So, I mean, this is amending our bylaws. Everything that we bring is an amendment to the bylaw. But it's replacing the section with a new section. 4.2.2.1, I believe. Yeah.
Jeez, good. So how many you were about to give us?
Yeah,
the,
so we the Regional Housing Office did a survey of, I think they sent it out to about 100 different places that they suspected might be
yes.
accessory dwellings. Because one of the things is some of these things are grandfathered. They've been out there for who knows how long.
Right.
There has been a process for the last 30 years or so to create one, but it's hard to tell how many there really are.
Mm-hmm.
But we got 23 qualified responses out of that, and which is not a statistical number, but
Mm-hmm.
then there are very few of these already, so it's hard to get a statistical number. So we just take what we can get. And 64% of the ones that came back are occupied by people that are not related to the homeowners. 50% have just one occupant. 60% are one bedrooms or studios, which you might expect with the size.
Sure.
And then over 50% have been in existence for over 10 years. So, I mean, that doesn't really then give you okay, well, now I can put that into a formula and here's the answer. But I think it generally, and there's some other stats, like not all of them, I mean, in fact, I think only about half of them are they charging rent, so it's family members and things like that.
Do you have an idea of how many people would take advantage of this?
Well, so the best indication we've got is that some other towns nearby have liberalized their accessory dwelling unit bylaws. And so, in Acton, for example, they changed this last year, and about 15 to 20 units have been converted. And, they're a higher population situation, I think, than us. But we think maybe 10 is our guess. It's a wild guess, but maybe 10 a year for a while.
Is this anywhere in town?
Anywhere in residential districts of town, yeah.
Okay. And how does
I've got a few other towns here, too. I mean, I can't put them up on the screen, but...
how about how does it impact with septic systems? Do they still have to?
So the town has an existing procedure that they can, first of all, a accessory dwelling doesn't require a separate hookup. Okay, so it can use the same hookup, and that they can approve it as long as you're using water-saving, devices in the house and all of that. So, and that you meet all of the basic requirements for a hookup. So,
So if you're zoned for, say, a 4-bedroom house,
yeah, you have to meet Title V.
still have to-
Oh yeah, yeah. You can't violate Title V. That's for sure.
Hey, Matt, and if the square footage doesn't change, is there gonna be any change to the assessed values? Or if you're just modifying an existing structure within the confines of that structure?
There might not be. I don't know. I mean, again, the way our assessors work is that if these things turn out to be very fashionable, they might end up with a higher assessed value than another house with the same square footage. We don't know. They might have a lower one too. I just don't know. It really depends on how the market treats them over time.
A couple of quick questions. One is, do they have to be LED, the LEED certified, or?
No.
They don't have to meet
There are
a certain
no-
sustainability level?
No sustainability requirements on this, no. I think it'd be pretty difficult to do since we're talking about existing structures.
And how did you arrive at 750 square feet?
Well, there are lots of different bylaws around that are in the general realm. Okay,
Okay.
some are 800, some 650, I don't know.
Because
But-
that could be a two-bedroom.
But so, yeah, 750, what we did is we thought, okay, if you had a 2-car garage and you put something on top of the 2-car garage, it'd be about that, about 750.
But
So that was and we said that would be the by right. And yeah, you could put a pretty tight
Well, you
2-bedroom,
could-
it'd be
right.
pretty
So
tight.
I'm just wondering, did you go through different scenarios about how many people or,
Yeah,
and then if you're doing 10 a year, if you decided it was 2 bedrooms, you could have maybe.
yeah, but I don't think you're gonna get that
Children.
many of 2-bedroom. I mean, at least in terms of what we've seen,
you've seen.
how
Okay.
people are using these.
So
They're really more for single people, couples, that's more the typical scenario.
So
that you see.
let's look at the finances of the thing for
Right,
just a minute,
right.
if we could, and I'm going to start with the personal, and then we can move to whether
Sure.
the impacts for the town. I own a home with a 2-car garage that has nothing above it but an attic, and I am considering making that into an accessory dwelling unit. $50,000 to $100,000 later, I have an accessory dwelling unit, and with that, I'm going to be able to charge modest rent, $1,000. It doesn't feel to me like the economics of doing it in order to get some revenue are likely to pan out. It's much more likely that I have a family need. I have a parent who needs to be close by. I have there's some real reason that I need to keep my child close because they're special needs and they're going to grow up within the confines of my home. There are different reasons why you would spend this kind of money, but it's unlikely that you would spend this kind of money to just get some rent from a single person who wants to
Right,
move
I mean,
to Concord.
you might, in certain types of houses, well, some houses in Concord, used to be 2 families and now there's single-family homes, and it might be relatively easy to
Slice it back up.
slice something up. But yeah, in your scenario where you're doing new construction, clearly,
Yeah.
yeah. But I don't
So-
expect that we're going to get a lot of speculative accessory dwelling units.
So that's on a personal level. I would suggest that when these occur, they probably occur for much more personal reasons than they will for what we'll call more speculative or investment reasons. So that being the case, we as a finance committee need to focus on, what kind of, population would move into these, how many there might be, and the service side, the service delivery that we would see as a community. And as a person who rented an accessory unit when I was just out of college, I was a very light touch on the community. On the community that I was living in. I got in my car, I went to work every day, I came home and I made some dinner and I went, watched some TV and went to bed. It was not, it was not a big deal. The question of children in school, et cetera, may occur, but I think it's a less likely scenario. I'm happy to hear others' views on it, but in terms of the economic impact on the town's service delivery, it seems low. The other flip side of the coin is, will the town benefit in terms of tax revenue?
Right.
And And I think there's a chance that
They
you know,
will.
you add an extra unit on a garage, you're gonna have.
Exactly,
you're
that
gonna have-
triggers,
there's gonna
that
be a
would
tax
trigger.
union, a
But
tax-
for the
So
people who
assessed
have,
value would.
Assessed value
Right, the
would
assessed, that's-
likely go up.
but the people who already have accessory dwellings, what would trigger a reassessment of the value of their home?
Well, I think perhaps if they got a building permit to make an addition, but in the
But,
in
but
the
if,
old
no, if they,
bylaw, there wasn't a
existing,
lot
no,
to-
it's an existing, it's an existing accessory
Right,
dwelling, right? Would there be anything that would trigger that, or,
Not necessarily,
Okay.
no.
okay, so,
I mean, you would just have to do a comparative analysis, like I said, like by square footage. of
so then
units.
any incremental revenue, property tax revenue we get from increased assessed value would come from new dwellings, is that?
That's right. 'Cause,
Okay.
Yeah, they're already there.
Exactly,
Right,
right,
there,
okay,
yeah,
so it's
right.
the new, it's only the new stuff,
Newly created, yeah.
okay.
So Carrie, is there a category in new growth for this subcategory that we're talking about?
It's probably just building permits, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it
Well,
just
but there are
building
different
permits?
categories of building permits. There could be a separate one for it. That's my,
Yeah.
for an order of magnitude.
So the question is there a new category for
This kind of,
any improvements that are made within a home?
does it fall under new growth? Is it one of the
Yes.
categories of, within new growth?
Yes.
Okay.
All building permits are reviewed for potential new growth.
So this would go right to the levy limit, it would increase the levy limit as new growth?
Yes.
Nice, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's de minimis.
Right, but anytime a building permit is pulled, that triggers an inspection by the
Right.
assessors to see if there is new growth.
The ones that are by right, though, won't trigger a permit, so those ones will be.
No, they'll.
Yeah, they will.
If you
Yeah,
do
they will.
construction, you have to get a building permit.
Yeah, they will, yeah, they will, they will.
Yeah, no.
Matt, what just a basic concept, what defines an accessory dwelling? So if it's a family member living in your home, you don't require an accessory dwelling.
Well, it's true, but no, we're talking about something that has its own, kitchen,
Kitchen,
right?
right.
I think that's the most important thing, but yeah, that is a dedicated kitchen and bath. It doesn't need its own separate entrance, for example. You can have the entrance be shared for the two units. So. Oh, yes, so the occupancy, that's probably also material here. So the owner has to live in either the primary unit or the accessory unit. And it can be rented, but it may not be condoized. It can't be sold, okay?
Okay,
So that is a restriction, yes.
And do we have any?
because it's not
restrictions?
transferable.
Does the
No,
town
it
have
is
any restrictions
transferable,
on
but
Airbnb?
the whole
So if
house
somebody
Oh,
wants-
yes, the
as a
town
unit,
has a restriction,
as a
so
thing.
they,
Right, but the accessory.
we
isn't trans-
explicitly say it in here that they may not be used as a bed and breakfast. Yes. So that, yeah. And we have a bed and breakfast bylaw that basically you cannot have an Airbnb in Concord
Right.
unless
That-
you are a B and B, that you go through a special permit process.
So the financial impact is de minimis.
Is what minimal?
It feels minimal.
It's,
to
it,
me.
it feels
Yeah.
minimal to me.
So
That
we're
was
talking
my
about it
belief,
because.
but-
The only other one.
It was on the agenda.
Okay.
The only other one would be, as Matt said, if the assessed
No,
value
they-
goes up or
no,
down
can't,
based on favorability of people buying the units, right? That would be the only other.
But that's speculative at best.
Exactly,
you
yes.
know, so.
So, Mr. Chairman, do we opine on this? Do we,
I don't know that we're gonna opine on this at town meeting, given what we consider to be the minimal.
Right.
I mean, if we are asked, I could step up and say, we discussed this at our meeting and we consider it to be a minimal impact,
But that's a separate.
so,
Good.
short and sweet.
sounds like a good idea.
Okay, so now we're talking about two-family.
Yeah,
which
so
is
two
not.
families.
Yeah,
All right, so two families. First of all, just a little bit of the background there. We do know now that there are 106 two families extant in Concord. Okay.
You said that as if we didn't know a couple.
Well, we didn't know the accessory dwellings, how many we've got.
Oh, okay.
We're not sure about that. We have a sense of approximately of it, but with two
Oh,
families,
okay, I thought
we know what we got. We got 106. So, 106 is not that many when you consider. I think we have like 6,000 or so residences, maybe 6, 7, somewhere in there. Yeah, around 7,000 residences in town. And in particular, we're going to drill down on Residence C. Residence C has a little over 1,000 residences, and 66 of the 106 two-families are in Residence C. So the 62% of all two-families in Concord are in Residence C. Now, almost all of the two-families were built before 1928. And the reason for that is our current zoning makes it almost impossible to build a two-family. That, you know, it's single-family zoning, and residence A, B, C, double A, it's a single family. Now, there's very special circumstances under which, like if you're a affordable housing organization, you can put a second unit, and what you'll see that's what
Main Street.
Habitat for Humanity is doing.
Right.
But absent that, you're just out of luck, okay? Now, when we looked at, again, trying to provide more housing options within town, the two-family was attractive because there are some already. You know, it doesn't change the character of the town as much if there are more two-families put in because people are used to looking at them. You know, and even on vaunted places like Hubbard Street, there are two families.
Right.
And, you know, they fit in. So, but we wanted to be careful about adding two families. So one of the benefits, so we're restricting them initially to Residence C. So Residence C, first of all, because there's more history of having them there. But secondly, because the zoning of Residence C is quarter-acre zoning, has more constraints. So between the setbacks, the height, and especially the floor area ratio, you can only put up a certain size building on a Residence C lot, most Residence C lots. Yeah, occasionally you get a 1 acre Residence C lot. There are very few of them. They haven't been carved up. But if you do get one of those, then the constraints don't work, but they're rare. So what we saw was, right now, builders are building single-family homes in Residence C right up to the limits of the floor area ratio, generally. And so if we have two families that have to meet the same dimensional requirements, they'll have no more visual impact than your typical McMansion that's getting built in Residence C. So we thought that kind of had its own self-regulating principle and that we could quickly put it in. If you had two families allowed in Residence A, you could put up two 5,400 square foot units on a conforming lot, which would be, you know, two giant houses with some connection.
Shared wall.
Yeah, with a shared wall, which might not be a very, I don't know, appealing model for some builders, but you never know. So what we're proposing to do is change this the bylaw to you know, allow the Board of Appeals to grant a special permit for the construction of a two-family. So note, in this case, we're not allowing it by right in any case. It has to be by special permit. That mainly is to ensure that there aren't egregious things proposed in terms of, you know, 4 garages across, you know, next. We've seen examples of this. You have a house on this side, a house on this side, 4 garages connecting, and it just is
Facing
like
the street.
Yeah, it's not very attractive. And the same thing with, you have potential for more impervious surface, right, with parking. And so again, to just kind of be able to review what's being proposed and ensure that it's compatible with the neighborhood, we really said we'll start with this caution of do it with a special permit process attached to it. So in the two families, other than those things, is a pretty straightforward concept, because you can be an absentee landlord, rent out both sides. You can condoize it, although very few two families have been condoized in the existing ones in Concord, which is really interesting. They're still under one ownership. And you may not have a detached two family. They must be a duplex. So common wall. And then they have to meet the FAR, the setbacks and the height for residence C. And of course, when you get a special permit for a two-family, it is transferable. So we figured that limiting it also to residence C was important because when we're doing two families, there really are, the units per unit is smaller than a single family because of just the dimensional limits. But, we are talking about potentially having a family unit in each of those, maybe a smaller family unit, but so still. And so there's going to be more density, more activity. And so near the town centers, that the impact of that density is less because more walking, if you drive, you're not driving as far in town, those kinds of things. And if we put it in residence A or AA, you can imagine that you're creating more sprawl. You're essentially increasing the population density in outlying areas as opposed to near the core. And that's what we, smart growth principles. We want to put more density near the village centers. That's about it.
So what do we know about the potential financial impact on the town about this?
There is actually an activity happening right now with our town staff, and I'm sorry that I don't have the data tonight, but what they're doing is using a combination of GIS and assessor data to come up with how many school-age children that are existing in two families in Concord, and that we can compare to the average school-age population in normal housing. Okay, and see what the relative impacts are.
Are they including school-age children in condominiums in that?
So we already have done an analysis of all the PRDs in town. So
good. Okay.
Those are
Yep.
And what we found was really interesting. Out of 85 units, we have very good response rate on this, by the way. Out of 85 units of PRD housing, there were a total of 17 school-age children. So it's a very low ratio. And PRDs, as you can imagine, are likely to, I don't know, they're most of them that have been built recently would be likely to have more school-age children,
Right,
I think,
'cause they're bigger,
than a duplex. Because the developers have been putting them a minimum number of duplexes in most cases. The other thing that I'd say mitigates the potential financial impact is I'm not sure that developers will have much appetite to build two families. That, if anything, what we've seen is a dwindling number of two families in town as people have converted existing two families to single families. And in fact, I did meet with a realtor in town who actually is developing a two-family in West Acton, but who said that the economics of Concord make it less likely that he would pursue such a strategy here. And that's because in West Acton, there's kind of a top end of the single-family market, 800K or something. But in Concord, that top end, there just isn't a top end. And so you can monetize a lot out of a single-family home. So my fear here is not that we're going to end up with 1,000 two-families getting built, people tearing down and building hundreds of two-families. My fear is no one will build any. But I'm hoping. I want to kind of provide the option.
So do we need to opine on this one, Mr. Chairman?
It's not clear to us how to even derive either you're doing a study to try to
And we'll
assess
try to provide that data in
what
the
the
next
school
week,
in the next week or so
Yeah.
because the big impact is a school-age child has a big impact on taxes, on service delivery.
It sounds like a good idea, but
It does sound like a good idea. I don't know that I would discourage it. I just don't know that we have sufficient capacity to really assess to assess it.
And go with your gut is not something the finance committee really likes to
Never.
use.
No. Although
It's personality type.
sometimes when you go through our deliberations, you wonder what exactly we did. So,
Committee secrets, Mr. Chairman, committee secrets.
No, there's nothing secret here. We're on display, full display. All right, I don't think we really are intent on making any statements at town meeting, given the our minimal ability to really.
Yeah, I think
figure
you
anything
may
out.
be asked. I mean, there
Yeah.
certainly just people, as I've heard most people have responded extremely positively to this. On the other hand, I've heard some debate, and it's usually around the school-age children business.
Yep.
And so you may be asked to weigh in, is what I suspect.
Well, any new dwelling unit that places one child in the schools
Yeah.
is likely to be anywhere from a loss to maybe a wash. I mean, it's a very expensive thing to fund another head in the school
Yeah.
system.
It's a loss. It's a loss.
It's pretty much going to
Yeah,
be a
sure.
loss. So obviously that the concern with just building more single-family homes is that each one may bring a family, which becomes a net tax loss to the community, and this is yet another way of creating units of housing. So
Well, and
it's a
see, I
concern.
think that what we're hoping that this shows, and I'm just saying hoping because we're bringing this to town meeting, but is that the number of children on average in two-family units is with the same total square footage.
Right.
Compared to a single family, a new unit of single family housing will be the same.
Not the same.
Yeah.
Even though there may
That's what I'm guessing.
even though there may be two family units or living units of
Right,
people,
it's just
the number of children are
family
not going to be.
configurations of those units
Yeah.
versus building.
Right.
If you
Right.
move into a 5,000 square foot new house, guess what?
With
There's
4
gonna
bedrooms
be
or whatever.
children,
Yeah,
I think.
it's likely.
Just kind of, there are types of housing that we have a shortage of in town.
Yeah.
I did the
Well, these are them. Among
That's right, smaller units, the
Yeah.
units that are
Rentable
available to
units.
people like Dean when he was just out of college.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had people come to work for me and they can't find a place anywhere near.
Right.
And people who are aging and don't want to live in a big house, and so I think that is really one of the major benefits of this, and I think we're all not really seeing too many financial problems.
Okay.
One question, Matt, is the planning board going to be tracking the change, after you've made these changes? Are you going to be looking at it every 2 years, every 5 years to see what changes have occurred?
Well, we haven't discussed that. I think that certainly it does behoove us that when we make a change like this to look back and see, like when we passed the floor area ratio, I'm constantly checking in on, well, how many did the ZBA, override and by how much and things like that to just see, is this really actually having an effect?
Mhm.
But we haven't had a formal process around that. I think the planning board tends to look forward and rarely looks back, but we clearly need to.
Would that be something the Board of Assessors does?
Well, the Board of
Or
Assessors
who
will
would have-
certainly
they would
collect
have
data.
the data,
They'll
right?
collect the data. I think that someone to do the analysis, that's a separate question. Yeah. And I think our planning department is very good at that kind of thing, the staff.
Matt, one quick question. How many lots fit in the Zone C? Do you know?
There are 1,000.
That's okay. You did say that.
So, again, I don't know if I want to take more of the board's time, the Finance Committee's time by going through the other stuff like the PRD bylaw. We've got a public hearing coming on the 25th. I strongly recommend you come attend. Otherwise, I think.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay.
I think
Next
the
up-
chair's left the room. He'll be back.
All right. Here we go. CPA data.
to start?
Good evening. Could you introduce
Yeah,
yourself and
John
get?
Kratzley.
Okay.
10 Edmonds Road, Chair of the Community Preservation Act Committee, and with me are two members of the committee, Nancy Nelson and Diane Proctor. So you have in your packet Article 44. There are 10 proposed projects totaling $1,965,000. I don't see a 5, so it's 960. 960. 6 projects are town projects. 2 are for nonprofits, the Friends of Minuteman National Park and Minuteman Arc, and 2 are for religious organizations, the First Parish in Concord and the Holy Family Parish. In terms of the statutory requirements of the Community Preservation Act distributions, 2 of the projects are for community housing, A and B. At the top, the Concord Housing Authority, the Commonwealth Avenue housing project that is just on the edge of the Giroux land, and the Regional Housing Services Program, that's B, the first top 2 projects. 3 are historic preservation. That's the First Parish in Concord, the Holy Family Parish, and the Friends of Minuteman Park, Electric House Gardens, Hardscape Rehabilitation. 3 are split in terms of the division of money between open space and recreation. That's the Giroux Park improvements, the Warner's Pond dredging project, and the Assabet River pedestrian bridge preliminary drawings and permitting. And 1 is recreation. That's down at the bottom of the list, the Minuteman Arc Accessible Outdoor Oasis. And the final and 10th project is administration for managing the CPC, including those nice signs that we have around town at the various projects that have been funded. So those are the 10 projects that are proposed. I'm certainly open and ready, and so are the 2 members that are here, if necessary,
a
to
few.
answer questions.
I'll begin.
Yeah.
Hi, I was the observer to your committee. You might have remembered me asking some pertinent questions. And I just wanted to start by saying that, first of all, I think your committee does great work. The work you do is important and you do it really well. You're thorough, you're conscientious. It's great. The work you do is great. I do have a few questions, okay? My first question is obviously the money that's being allocated to the First Parish Church. I know that you got some legal opinions about that. So do you want to share with us if we have exposure there?
Yeah, let me talk about both of the
Good.
religious project applications, because I need to begin by indicating that I had disqualified myself from involvement with the First Parish application because my wife, Holly Kratzley, had been one of the applicants, one of the signers of the application. After consultation with the State Ethics Commission and the Assistant Attorney General that you talked to there, I thought it was wisest. I think I could have been fair, but I was worried about perceptions of a husband and wife relationship and the chairman, so that I thought it was wisest not to participate in any of the either the site visits or the deliberations about the First Parish application. That became more complicated in the eyes of the Assistant Attorney General at the Ethics Commission because of the nature of the way this committee deliberates when it allocates funds. There's an effort to reach a consensus in which there's a give and take and an ebb and flow, if you will, among the allocation of money between all applicants, including some applicants that ultimately got no funding and other applicants that received virtually everything they asked for. And that included, of course, what would become of the two church applications. So the advice of the Assistant Attorney General was you should actually disqualify yourself from all of those conversations. So in that respect, I am really unable to tell you how those individual decisions in terms of the dollar amounts were made. I had expected our vice chair to be here and had been fully told that our vice chair would be here, but we do have two other members here. If there are questions that go directly to how did those numbers of 75,000 to each of those projects?
No, actually, my
So-
question was more, I know that you got some advice from our legal
And that's the
counsel.
part I feel comfortable talking about.
Good,
I
let's
don't
talk
think-
about that.
I don't think the State Ethics Commission advice about not getting involved in the ebb and flow of the money
Right.
restricts me from indicating what we did, and I think very carefully to be legally prepared
Right.
to make those decisions.
I guess, are we exposed?
Well, the short answer is you can never tell.
That's true.
Whether
Right.
someone
Okay.
will, as I looked at, I read for the fourth time today, the Kaplan versus the town of Acton.
Right.
And it was a taxpayer, 10 taxpayers in Acton who filed that lawsuit. So you can just
Okay.
not predict.
Right.
And I don't think our committee can give you any assurance.
That's right.
On,
Okay.
on that question. We did obtain town council legal opinions, and I have a copy for everyone if you have not seen those. Town council legal opinions.
I would appreciate it.
Yeah, we haven't seen, we
You
haven't
could
seen,
pass those out. I have not seen
we have
them.
not seen
let me
those.
pass those
That would
out,
be great.
Because there are two separate letters, and let me explain those two letters as well. Sure, I have kept my copy. If you see one that has my initials on it.
Pass it back.
Keep that one.
No, here's mine. And you'll, let me, once you all have it, let me explain why there are two separate letters. The first letter is the October 4th letter from town council, and it directs itself exclusively to the First Parish application and the Holy Family Parish application. And it directs itself, as no one will be surprised, to the three factors that the Kaplan decision indicates are essential to evaluating an application of a religious organization for Community Preservation Act funding. There's a careful analysis on the second page of the October 4th letter regarding the nature of the First Parish application, which seeks restoration of the bell tower and clock. And there is a long history recited in the letter regarding the town's ownership, really, funding and ownership of the bell tower and clock virtually until the recent time, and an indication that the funds were being sought exclusively to restore the bell tower and clock as a town, both significant to the town historically and significant in terms of the fact that it was a town-owned clock. There has been some changes. For example, the town for years provided the light bulbs and the electricity, and only recently has that changed to the church providing the light bulbs and the electricity. But essentially, the legal counsel's opinion is that this, if you apply, you see at the bottom of this page, applying the three factors outlined in Kaplan, they concluded is likely eligible for CPA funding without running afoul of the anti-aid amendment. And they go through the different criteria. Then, with regard to Holy Family Parish, the opinion letter does express, because at that point, the parish had applied for a broader renovation project, and the letter does express some greater reservations. You read the last paragraph, it says, "A grant may cross the line," imprecise as that legal line would be. So the Holy Family Parish revised their application to make it for roof renovation, far more consistent with historic preservation goal. And you will see in the November 25th letter, which is the second part of your package, the November 25th letter, Town Council addresses the Holy Family Parish Rectory renovation on the last page, Project 11, the full page of Project 11/19, and determines that it falls within with clarification provided by the supplement, being that it is for a roof repair only, and an expansion of publicly accessible space for public use. The project likely falls within the constitutional protection for government grants to be given on an equal basis to churches as to other non-denominational organizations. And then it cites a particular case, U.S. Supreme Court case, about playground resurfacing. And it leaves a final note at the bottom of the paragraph regarding the crosses on each side of the door of the rectory. It concludes, although we think the better position is the project does not violate the anti-aid amendment, the position is not without risks. So I think, Mary, just to answer your question, yes.
It's
there are
risky.
risks
Yes.
in both of these applications. And I think that may take you to asking questions about how members, for the part that I was disqualified on, how members actually thought through a yes vote as opposed to a no vote. That really, I was not present for that final determination to treat each of the applications at the $75,000 level. I do think these letters provide a legal basis for the committee to have felt comfortable making those recommendations and putting them in the warrant article. The next thing I can say is that with the town manager's approval, I have been authorized to go ahead and meet with town council prior to town meeting. In fact, I just read an email sitting here with some times and dates for next week to discuss three things that I proposed talking with town council about ahead of time. The first is making sure the town council is comfortable with an arrangement whereby I will present the article, much as I'm doing to you tonight, but should there be town meeting members with questions about how the actual decision-making process took place, the part that I was not able to be present for, the vice chair would then handle those questions. And I've already talked with Carmen Reese about that. She feels that, and actually she recommended that procedure, but I want town council to be comfortable. Secondly, I wanted town council to be fully appraised and fully comfortable with answering questions from the floor on these legal issues that we've just been discussing here. And the author, the author of these opinions has usually always been at town meeting, and I would expect to have that meeting with him and go through in more detail the kinds of issues that I'm hearing people talking about that he ought to be ready to answer. The third, a little bit more delicate, is whether town council would be comfortable preparing a handout, because there is, I think, a fine line between a handout that's advocacy and a handout that's simply informational. But it may be, and you all may have some thoughts on this, whether a handout with some of this legal analysis in it might be useful for town meeting members to pick up on the first day of town meeting, just as a preliminary to what may be a lively conversation. So that's the three things I'm going to talk. I've now been approved to talk to town council about.
Do we have an opinion?
I have a comment. I think we have arrived at the very edge of what the CPC can really do. I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, there were multiple grants granted to the Wright Tavern. The Wright Tavern was held by the church. It was used for private purposes. It had offices in it, and it had no public purpose, but they wanted window replacements and roof repair. And we came to an agreement. The CPC made a recommendation within their grant funding that there be some public purpose, that there be either tours or some sort of open houses, etc. Last year, we had a similar situation with the Masons, where the Masonic Lodge, also on Monument Square, really right next to the building we're talking about tonight, was not a public building. It's a private fraternity building. And would there be, are we crossing a line in funding fundamentally a private organization with public funding? And they argued rather persuasively that they open their doors if you ask, and they will allow you to schedule events or have, access to their building. If you would like, they will review your application for maybe a reception or some other purpose. Fine. But here we're funding a rectory which is going to be church offices. This does not seem like a public purpose, and we're really getting close to the edge of what if someone on Main Street says, my house is in a on Lexington Road says my house is in a historic district and I'd like to have it repainted because it needs new windows. This is the facade of my house. I'm perfectly happy to make my application. We are very close to something that is, regardless of the religious nature of it, it's a private thing and it's used for private purposes. That's just that's where we are. That's why I believe we have arrived. And so that's my opinion. And I think it's a challenge.
Those who presented to us on the renewed or changed application from Holy Family indicated that the roof renovation and the space renovation below the roof would become public accessible spaces. There may also be an office, maybe one office, but that would allow an expansion of public use. I think town council may have alluded to that, but they certainly put into their application the public use that would come with the roof alterations.
So, Dean, I would agree with that, and just add that for two $75,000 allocations, I'm hesitant to, despite the opinion of town council, to open up the town to further litigation.
That is. Can you just repeat it a little more?
Yeah, what I was trying to say was for modest amounts of money, $75,000 for the two projects, I'm concerned that we're opening up the town to additional litigation. That's what I said. 2 75s equals 150. Yeah.
I concur with Dean as well. I mean, it seems to me that when this warrant item gets voted on, all 10 items get voted correctly. Correct, as a package?
There are you can make line item amendments to
On the
change
floor.
it. So from the floor, someone could say, I want to rescind the 75,000 for this item, and it could be voted. So that amendment can be made.
Right. So, I mean, that's the way it may go down, given the way it's being presented. But I think I agree with what Dean had to say. These are not town properties. And the question about not Holy Family, but the First Parish, it was at one point town property, then it reverted to the church?
Yes.
So you're saying that?
Well, let me, I don't know if you all
It's a
are
little more
comfortable with
complicated.
Like the clock belongs to the town or something.
our historian here, my wife, the reason I'm disqualified, did all the detailed legal research about the town clock. In addition to the fact that there was an extensive, well, you want to say just a quick word about it? If you would permit.
First parish was the
Step up,
meeting
Holly.
house. And there's a whole, and the Puritans didn't like iconographic anything, so that's why there's never been a cross. There's never, even if it weren't Unitarian, there wouldn't be a cross on the meeting house. But it was a meeting house. It was a public facility. The selectmen met there. There was no standing committee, which is the governing body today of the church. The selectmen ran the meeting house as well as the town government. And that existed, and so everything,
The state
the meeting
legislature
house
met
was
there.
paid for by the people of the town of Concord for the town of Concord. And the current building is new as of 1900, and that's when, at town meeting, when the church burned down. And so at town meeting, when the church was being replaced, had a motion that the town should buy the clock for the new building. And from that point until the 1990s, they provided all the power. There was a separate line to the church just for the clock. The clock tower doesn't, it doesn't sit over the sanctuary, it sits in front of it. And it was the town clock, and they were very proud that they could have an illuminated town clock. So that was always considered the town clock, but it carried over, it was replacing the fourth meeting house, which was built in 1841. And at that time, which looks very similar, it was still a public building. The separation of church and state had been legislated in 1833, but it wasn't until 1856 that in Concord, a standing committee was formed to run the business of the church, and the selectmen no longer were running the church. So that was when the separation occurred, after that last meeting house was built. So it was consistently a public building, and including the one that this was built to replace as almost exact replica of the one that burned down.
What happened in 1990, though?
1990, we rewired the church and just said, the mechanism that brought the power in for the tower, it just, at that point, having a separate meter, it didn't make sense. We agreed to take, it just sort of happened in the renovations of the electricity.
The clock, however, has never changed. It's nature, correct? That's my understanding.
Right. There's four faces, as everyone knows, and they're all illuminated, and it is the town clock.
And it's in the historic district to begin with, right?
Right. But it has, I think, that is our argument, and that's what the town council thought was compelling.
I have another
about this.
question.
It went before they even discussed it.
Jerome, once we finish the business, okay?
I'll go next.
So, at the presentation, will the town meeting attendees have the two opinion letters from town council?
I think that's his question, whether that
that's up
should
for-
be.
Would we put those out
Is
as?
that our decision?
Well, I'm
No.
asking-
It's not really our call.
No, it's not our call.
No, if
You might want to
Right.
talk with the moderator about that particular call.
Right.
we are obviously committed as a unanimous CPC to that warrant article.
Right.
And so in an effort to make the town as aware as possible of what these different issues are, what the different legal opinions have been, what the three tests are, why town council thinks these two projects meet those three tests, we are proposing with town council to create an informational handout that everyone would have as they go into.
Okay.
That's
That's
not
not our call.
our,
That's
that's
not
not
our
our
call.
problem.
No.
Dee, did you
So
have
that's
come?
my question.
Oh, okay. What's your question?
Just I was just asking. a
Okay.
question, right? So if it's line by line, could the town meeting actually exceed the available funds?
No,
No.
no.
No, you can't go up, you can only go down.
John, I do have a question on the write-up, the second write-up, the November write-up, and it's on the rectory renovation. In the second paragraph, and this goes to the point of the amount of money. In the second paragraph, it says that $150,000 CPA grant would fund about a quarter of the cost of the roof replacement of the historic. Now, and then it says of the historic replacement, now the rectory, and it's would likely be increased because of the requirement to conform to historic district. So is that what, are they trying to say, how do you get to $75,000?
So that's the part where I would not have been.
Right, and your assistant. And I only ask, well, no, I'm not suggesting you're funding more, but I wondered how you arrived at the 75,000. But my bigger, I guess my larger point is, I maybe don't have to know that. I guess what I'm saying is, if you were to give this document as it's currently written, use that to distribute to the public, I think it could possibly be a little confusing. And I would not, I don't suggest you do that. If legal counsel is saying to you, my only opinion is if legal counsel is saying to you, they think that you are justified in doing this, then more power to you.
Can I move on to another?
Yes,
Are we
please.
done with this?
Yes.
She wants to move to a different item on the list,
Oh,
on
good.
the
There are a couple of
CPC.
items.
Yeah. No, so there's 10,
There's 9
No, I need a
projects.
couple more.
yeah.
So John, when I was at your meetings, several of the members of the CPC voiced concern about money being allocated for projects without clear deliverables. And I think that started with perhaps Rideout Park, where money was allocated to the project and then kind of put in the bank. when
Emerson Field.
Emerson Field.
Emerson Field.
What did I say?
Ride out.
Right out.
Okay, I meant Emerson. Might have happened at Rideout too, but Emerson was the one I'm thinking of. So anyway, money is put aside and banked without clear deliverables. And I know that a lot of the members of your committee were expressing concern about that, and that apparently is something that's new. So I'm looking at this year's, and the big project here, of course, is Giroux, the $500,000 for what's called Phase 1, and I think that's in addition to money that's already been allocated in prior years. So I'm wondering, are there clear milestones associated with that project or with that phase that are clearly articulated? Or is this another put
I
money?
can certainly check with my fellow members, but my belief is there are very particular items that are part of Giroux. That includes the first bathroom, the previous Walter bathroom, and a series of pathways.
Right, the first part of it is, I believe, in Nancy's, correct me if I'm wrong, Diane Proctor.
Diane, you want to step up to somebody, just for those at home, so they can see. That's okay.
And Nancy Nelson is behind me coaching if I do this wrong. Diane Proctor, 57 Sudbury Road. The first allocation is for dredging and of the pond, of Warner's Pond. And for a portion of the pond. And,
That's not
oh,
Giroux.
I'm sorry, I'm talking about Warner's.
Well, it's close to Giroux.
Pond. And you're
It's close
talking
to
about Giroux.
I am.
But Giroux Park and Warner's Pond are.
The first part of it is for a bathroom that would be a composite bathroom where
Composting.
compost
Yeah.
bathroom.
Be the small
bathroom.
compost,
And yeah, exactly. And the second one is to make the area where people park and then access to the pond cleaned up and more easily accessible. It is presently going to be right next to the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, And so there's a feeling that the more we can do to get that into good form, not that we can do, but the town feels that the more they can do to get that into a ready position for use of the public, and that's the reason for that funding.
Is that, so that's the 500,000?
That's the collective 500,000.
So last year you appropriated 200,000. So did that have clear milestones as well?
I wasn't on the committee last year, so John would have to answer that. And neither was Nancy.
Okay.
I'm gonna think that has been used for some preliminary clearing at Giroux, but I don't have the specifics on that one, so maybe some of it's been held over. But the specific deliverables for this grant involve the bathroom.
And the parking.
The parking.
And the trails.
Trails, so that when you use the parking at the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail and begin to access Giroux as a walking area, you have a series of preliminary trails at the upper level.
I'm glad to hear that, because when I was at the preliminary meetings, it was confusing as far as what exactly was going
And I
was
think
going
we
to.
pressed them so that we actually had them back a second time.
Good.
In order to get more clarification on that.
These funds then would be spent in the next year.
And that's the point. Yes, not a carryover, not a, to speak to
Good
that,
question.
John, on the one I misspoke about, the Warner Pond, they're asking for this as a phase 1, phase 2. I mean, the money that we're giving them this year would not cover all those costs. So it's an accumulative process. And I think you spoke to this at the last FinCom meeting, in which you said clarity to the public about this funding,
Exactly.
where it's going, how long it will come, when it might come back,
Exactly.
is terribly important.
Right.
And so I think that continues to be something that we will need to
And
emphasize.
dredging does have specific targeted, designated
Areas.
areas of the pond.
Great.
Warner's Pond.
Warner's Pond, so I think we're.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
Diane, don't leave that table. Because I have a question that I think only you can answer, because John has had to recuse himself. There doesn't seem to be any problem with meeting the 10% threshold for open space. Between open space and recreation, literally 69% of the funds are being allocated. However, for multiple projects, we made a call to divide the number between open space. In almost all cases, it looks pretty much right down the middle, 250, like in town of Concord, Warner's Pond. Oh, it's half open space, it's half recreation, or the Aspet River, whatever. How are those determinations arrived at? I mean, it seems just like we just want to throw some money at the open space question, and there's no new open space being actually
There is no
acquired
new-
here, so
no,
that's a
not
issue.
to my knowledge, there is no additional open space. I think my understanding, and again, I turn to experts beyond me who may know more than I do, but the open space usage is to treat the open space. It's not that we're adding open space. And in fact, if you'll see, we put aside money for future acquisition of open space in the town. Down below, you'll see that land acquisition
Oh, yeah, the
reserve
100,000. Yep.
and with the understanding that we are not in this particular year expanding open space in any clear way. We are enhancing open space, but not expanding it.
So,
And so, Dean, these are
well, a
responses
bridge
from the,
construction just seems like a piece of architecture. To call it open space seems like a real stretch, in my personal view.
all right.
That's all.
The where that bridge construction would be placed and its eventual use is around a great deal of open space, actually along the river, and it as well. It allows people who are trying to do walk, rather than drive cars, to be able to traverse from one part of the town to another with greater safety and greater alacrity. And whether that falls, I think you've made a good point, Dean. I don't know that necessarily falls under the the title of open space, but it does open up space
It does
that
connect to
otherwise
open
was
space
inaccessible.
areas.
And it, I don't know the legal definition. I don't know the legal definition of open space, but it is
It's okay.
absolutely clear that it does make more accessible spaces to
Right.
the public.
I don't want to belabor the
And-
point.
and
It
we
just,
have to meet certain percentages, as you.
well,
as
you're
you-
well over
Let me
in
just say,
both.
the other piece that may give you more comfort, the other piece of good news is that for next year, the legislature increased our funding in two ways. So that should we have a substantial open space need, we will have a new sources of funding. The registry fee, the state registry fee has been increased. That, we always have our local property sales fee, but we'll have a new input from the state registry fee increase. And in the budget surplus allocation, some of you may have followed in the Globe the fact that there was a large budget surplus and nobody seemed to know what to do with it, and it lasted months and months. Ultimately, because of legislative action, we are getting, the CPC fund statewide is getting another $20 million from the state budget surplus. Now, we don't know how that's going to be allocated between towns that have a 3% and towns that have a 2% and towns that have a 1% assessment. But we certainly expect to have a far bigger pot of money next year that would, I think, it could ease anybody's concerns about whether we've been a little stingy with our open space reserve fund.
I'm just pointing
So
out.
item K, the Minuteman Park, the Minuteman Arc, is that on Minuteman Arc property?
It is. It's an outdoor area that is currently not utilized. The plan involves a
They're not spending
series
it.
of
Oh, okay, you're right.
So they didn't put anything
accessible
aside.
Yeah, you're right.
activities.
They didn't spend it.
For,
Just didn't spend what they had in the bank. What they
so
had in
that
the bank.
folks who are mostly indoors
I
in
know.
their building
It would
throughout the
cost.
day
Anything would really
now come
cost.
outdoors and have a series
about
of
this?
swings and other sort of outdoor musical things and.
It's admin, isn't it?
Oh,
And as
that's-
well,
that's an
neighbors
annual.
in the area, and children in the area who wish to come and play there
Housing
will be
services.
more than
That's an
welcome.
annual thing.
So that it will have
Death
public
Ross.
access to it. It's
Liz
not
Ross.
going to be in any way restricted
It
to.
pays,
It's a
like,
good
say it's
developed
half the
area,
cost. The
and
town
we're-
pays
Yes,
for it.
it's increasingly developed, and so there are increasingly families and
Yeah,
children
it's
in
okay.
that area.
Operating.
So the presumption is it will
is.
seem appealing to children as well as to the
Okay, we're gonna let it go.
For multiple years.
spend time there.
I do have a couple
Sorry.
questions.
Okay.
Where did I want to start? Oh, I really want to commend you for item A, the Housing Authority, $300,000. It's good. It's about time. That's a significant amount of money. And it's well needed in that bucket. I wanted to also ask about item F. What is a hardscape rehabilitation?
You do have the most knowledgeable.
There are serious safety concerns with the built aspects of the electric gardens. The walkways, without handicap railings, for instance, as they go down, wind down to the river.
Okay.
The cobblestones and the bricks are popping up missile line and suffering just from great neglect over the years. And this has been happening over a long period of time. It's important to note that that this kind of project, given the backlog of maintenance needs in the National Park Service, which are primarily focused on literally catastrophic failure of certain things, this would probably not.
Okay, that was my question along that line. Is this type of work maintenance? Is it routine maintenance, or because even though it is in a historic area, your justification is because it would never see the light of day to get those funds because of the backlog?
That's one reason. And then just the horrible inadequate staffing for the park to manage multiple, maybe up to 30 historic structures
also, and tying in with the safety, it's also, all right.
And,
And
and
the incredible use that the Butler Gardens get, because it is,
Right,
you know, so integral
Right.
related to the mountains.
And Lexington CPC gave money for a not dissimilar project. So there is precedent
Yes.
in terms of CPC funding.
The other one, I'm kind of curious with the request that came in with the 500,000 for Warner's Pond and the 500,000 for Giroux. Did they present a 5-year plan for any of these projects, whether it's the Giroux property or Warner's Pond or?
They both have long-term plans. They
Uh-huh.
for greater expanded dredging, even though these are very targeted dredging areas.
Yeah.
And longer-term development of the Giroux property in terms of things like paths that will go, these preliminary paths are really only going to take you to the crest of that. If you've been out there where the house used to stand, to the crest, and then maybe more pathways down to the water. There'll be a potential dock of some sort
Yep.
down there.
But did they
So these
tie
are-
any numbers in?
Not for future applications.
Okay,
that
because
I'm familiar with.
we do have a chart that talks about the park improvement spending. And this is dated November 30th, 2019. And on here.
Is that
it-
CPC?
No, this is
No, this
provided
is
by the
for
town.
all of the park improvements.
And
And
This
it
isn't their
includes
problem.
Emerson Field and Emerson Playground and Giroux
It's not their
Park
problem.
and Rideout
It's
and
not their
Warner's
problem.
Pond and White Pond.
So D,
Yeah.
the CPC, this is really the town, we could talk to the town manager about this, but it's really, your main question is, did the town, in asking for this year's funding, present a long-term plan?
Right,
Let's,
with financial, with
Right.
financial.
financial
But-
expectation.
A general long-term plan that would expand on the things that they committed to do with this money, would be my response.
So,
Okay, that's good enough.
we've spoken to the town manager about the need to be more transparent about how they're asking for money and how they're, planning for projects of some scale over years. And this is actually the best we've seen in terms of that.
Yeah,
And
I
it,
think it's good.
it shows an ask with this year's 500 of another 520,000 or 530,000 over the next 2 years from the CPC itself.
The reason I bring this up is because I think our town does a really good job in the CPC about looking at each and every one of the applications and evaluating it on its merits alone, whether it's worthy of funding or not worthy of funding and how much funding and all. But there are other towns that assume the CPC is going to pick up costs. And, I don't want this chart to be misinterpreted.
Right.
And I don't, but I was curious as to whether or not that any financial information coming back in future years. I know Delia always did. She knew that she would with the dredging of Warner's Pond. But I hadn't heard of it for any of the others.
No, I suspect.
And I just wanted to make it clear that the CPC does their work independently from what other charts might show.
Are there any other questions about any of the project line items?
Okay,
John,
I did.
you got any more
if I
comments?
could,
Yeah.
just make one last
Sure.
comment, particularly for those of you that are skeptical about the First Parish, in particular the First Parish application, but also the Holy Family application. There's a line in the Acton opinion that I think speaks to both of these. We can imagine various circumstances where such grants would survive careful scrutiny. For instance, where historical events of great significance occurred in the church. And of course, we know that at the First Parish building, as Holly discussed, in an earlier version of it, the Continental Congress met in the Wright Tavern. They met in the meeting house that was next to the Wright Tavern. Or where the grants are limited to preserving church property with a primarily secular purpose. And of course, that clock is up there 24/7 for the town.
This is. Okay. Thank you. going
What's
on.
next?
Peter, you have a few minutes, and I am going to break with our schedule and just go to an observer report because Peter's got to leave early, and I would like to hear his observer report from the middle school building committee. So,
Okay, thank you, Dean. So I attended the meeting this morning. Much of the discussion was about the schedule, planning the schedule for the town meeting vote and the general election. They considered basically three options. One, which, let me back up, they figured that they'll have the feasibility results at the end of March to consider different options for layout and all that, building footprint and so forth. They figured that they'll have the costs from the schematic design in August. So based on that, then they're working on the schedule for the votes. So they considered three options, one of which would be a vote in either very early September or late August, and then the general election to follow that. They didn't like that one because everybody's returning back from summer and not enough time to really get the word out. The second option was to have the vote on September 16th, have a special election on September 16th, and then a general election at the end of September. And then the last option was to wait until November so that they could have the special election coincide with the general election, the national election.
could I say, before we go on, so we need a town meeting vote, and then after town meeting, we have to have a vote at the ballot. Is that right? Peter?
Correct.
Is that the scheduling? So they're auguring towards the vote at the ballot being mapped to whatever, November 4th or whatever that would be, which would mean we'd need a town meeting in October or something like, is that the idea?
Yes.
Behind that?
Yep. So I guess you have to have, once you have your special town meeting, you have to have the general election within, I think was it 30 days or 45 days after that?
So,
90 days?
okay, so, would there be any appetite for delaying any? I mean, obviously they're on a schedule and they're trying to move forward, but we're building a building that we hope will last us for 50 years. Would there be any appetite for waiting until the town has information about the decision from the MSBA for this year?
I think that they're feeling very comfortable that the MSBA, and they may have even gotten the word back, that they are not going to be considered.
No, the school committee meeting that met Tuesday this week,
Okay.
they are going to file again this year. And the decision process typically, I believe, finalizes in December. So why wouldn't the town prefer to have a conversation on the other side of the MSBA decision? Either they've said, yes, we will fund you this time, or we are absolutely certain as we go into our town meeting to deliberate, we know that we are not funded and we can deliberate on that. But what we're doing is we're having a deliberation with a MSBA pending, and we're actually going to have a vote before the MSBA finalizes their decision in December. So it seems a little bit putting the cart before the horse, in my view. They're coming. Well, we'll talk about that
We'll
later.
talk about
It is on the agenda. We will talk
Dean?
about that.
Are you certain they're reapplying?
Yes. They discussed it at the Concord School Committee meeting on Tuesday, and it's part of my observer report. They discussed it, and there were two options. They could just say, well, we've applied 3 times, and let's not bother because we're not going to get funded. And that would be very difficult to explain. Why aren't you at least trying? And the second option is you apply, but then you're having a town meeting and you're expecting to have a vote before a decision even comes down. And that's also difficult to explain, but they'd rather explain that and say, at least we're doing our due diligence. This is hanging over. The only thing that can go is good. You know, if we vote to build the school, then it's good. But it would be helpful if the town, in my view, had a definitive answer.
So I agree with that, Dean. You know, it occurred to me that if I understand it correctly, that the MSBA funding could be $20 to $30 million,
Yes.
which is the second biggest financial decision to be made after building the school in the first place. And it seems to me that process ought to get a little more time to work itself out.
Let's let Peter finish his
Sorry.
observer report because he has to leave. So I'm
Yeah,
sorry
I
to
guess,
interrupt.
well, my question would be, they didn't really get definitive answers from the MSBA until a couple months ago. So, yeah, I guess January. So from
the last cycle. Yeah, the last cycle. But I was under the impression that they got a letter in sometime in December said you've washed out of the process. Anyway, anyway.
Yeah, there was no discussion on that. I can certainly bring it up as a comment in my the next meeting. There's also an open forum coming up on the 27th, 7 p.m. I believe it's at Sanborn, although there was some question about that. And the public is definitely encouraged to attend that. So that being the case, the discussion was really about the schedule. They ended up voting on the schedule for the 16th of September to have a special town meeting with the vote at the end of September. Now, it was pretty unanimous vote. I think the town manager was the one, they might have had two who voted against it. And he said he believes that they made the right decision for the project from a cost standpoint, because one of the biggest issues is that if the school gets delayed, they will not be able to achieve the operational savings, which they estimate to be at least $500,000 a year for the 23-24 school year. So they will have to plan to operate two buildings if there's any risk in that. And for whatever portion of time that they have to actually operate the two buildings, they'll lose out on that savings. So in context with the cost of a special town meeting and other things, they felt like that was moving quicker was better. Town manager, I think, felt like the town would be best represented at the national election where we would have the most. So he declined. So that took most of the time, and then they were talking about enrollment. They've settled on about 700 students. There was discussion about, is there enough growth in that to, if the number of students increases. They feel that between the MSBA specs for space, there's about a 15% growth allowance in that. They also commented that the classroom size is about 20 in Concord, and the classrooms that will be built by MSBA specs handle 24, so there's plenty of room to grow if we need it. So they weren't concerned about that. Those were the two big items that they discussed today.
When you talk about bringing a cost, you said that they'd have a cost in August, right? Did I hear you correctly? What is the process to actually prioritize what they want in the school so that they can actually get a cost to bring to town meeting, whether it's September or whatever? What is the process for that?
Well, so the community input is big. They've got subcommittees, the sustainability committee. To me, the biggest cost in this thing is how sustainable we want to make the building. That's going to add 20 or minus 20 million one way or the other. And there's a lot of discussion about that. The other big point is, do we want to build an auditorium that's big enough to handle town meeting? So that's something that's being bandied about, as well as a gymnasium that could be used by the whole town because we just don't have enough gym space. So those are the three components that I think they're wrestling with. as well as educational visioning in terms of what's going to be right for the students in today's learning environment. So,
But who are the people that actually sit down and decide? What is the process
So within-
to sit down and decide to say, this is the school we want to bring forward, and it's going to cost X amount of money? I understand that there are a lot of competing priorities, and there's trade-offs to be made.
so you've got an
Hopefully,
educational committee, you've got the sustainability committee. They are providing their inputs to the feasibility team and to the project manager, who will then take all of that, come up with designs that the committee votes on to say, all right, this building is going to meet the educational needs. It incorporates the sustainability measures that we want, so we recommend it.
That's
So they're
before
gonna-
you have before you have a cost.
Yeah, well, once they have that, then they're going to go into schematic design and come up with a cost estimate for that.
so
they're
they
gonna
don't
get- they're
consider
gonna
the
get
costs when,
multiple- They're gonna get multiple designs.
Yep.
And they'll vote on a preferred design, and then they'll cost it out more closely.
so
I'm
they're
sure-
going to vote on a design without knowing the cost
I'm
of the
sure
design.
there will be some back of the envelope numbers that go with each of the designs that are brought
Yeah.
forward. that
And,
are not-
and there's going
that
to
are more
be,
than back of the envelope.
right, and there's going to be options as well that are talked about. Like if we want to add this level of sustainability, it's going to cost us X.
Okay.
Do we want to do that? And so they'll be asking for input on that.
Okay. Any other questions for Peter's observer report?
I have just one question for you. Is there some value in waiting for the MSBA, for submitting it? If the town goes ahead now in September, are they losing position with regard, because they're already in that realm of moving forward? Do they lose position with the state in the MSBA process?
I think the answer is no, you wouldn't lose position, but the reality is, if the state knows you're going to fund the school, to me, that's going to have an impact.
You think?
You think so?
Just a little.
All right.
Okay.
It's their call, right?
So you're sort of saying the decision's already been made to go forward without MSBA funding,
Yeah.
Well,
what
it's-
you're saying,
That we sort of tendency last year.
which was the second biggest decision the town will make beyond
Right.
building the
So
school. in the
Peter,
first
when
place.
is the next public,
Twice, is that right? Have you been denied twice?
Three.
3 times.
0 for 3.
so Peter, when,
And so then we're asking them to wait again and go for 4? Is that in essence what I'm hearing?
Well, that's what I was thinking, that if they're going to apply anyway, why would we vote ahead of the decision? You know, it
They
seems a little
decided to
weird.
go ahead and apply.
Yeah, they are gonna apply. They're
State
gonna
actually says yes after we vote. What happens?
we
then?
go back to go? We go
Yeah,
back
we
to the
actually
beginning.
Go back pretty
We go
far
back to-
because we have to true up our work with whatever MSBA's
So
process.
when is the next hearing, Peter?
In this little quarter that we think only 2 times it's been turned down. It's been rejected twice.
Yeah, that's what I.
We haven't had
Only twice.
You're right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
All
that's
right,
right.
I'm sorry.
I mean,
Stand
time
corrected.
goes fast, so.
Yeah, I stand corrected.
So when is the next hearing, Peter? For
February 27th.
27th, and where is
PM.
it?
It's scheduled for Sanborn, but I heard today there might need to be a change. So
And
It
there's
would be good if
also,
we went.
There's also on, I believe, the 15th, First Fridays of the League of Women Voters are having.
That's
some-
right.
some- thi- This coming Friday.
Tomorrow?
Whoa.
Whoa.
Is that tomorrow?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Oh, my goodness. That's why we're having fun.
Time is going fast.
Fast,
You just never
right?
know. But it is at 9:15 tomorrow. And there will be people from the middle school building committee to present their considerations, their deliberations, how they're progressing, the very questions you were asking. So
Oh,
I
good.
think it would be a
So
wonderful
when is
opportunity.
this and what time is this?
It's at 9:15. It's a first Friday, and it's at the church that is across from Fowler Library,
Union, West Concord Union Church.
West Concord Union Church. And everybody is welcome. When you go into that church, you go downstairs, and that's where the public meeting room is.
Great.
And it's set up there with opportunities for drawings to be
Great.
shown and projections to
Great.
be made.
Thank you.
And just lastly, the other data point you'll hear is that construction costs have been increasing 6 to 7% a year. So if they get pushed,
That's good, though. They were saying more than that. They were saying 8 to 10 or 8 to 9%. So that's slower than.
all right, thanks, Tim.
Okay, thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
All right, so we sort of skipped the queue there. So we sort of skipped the queue. The next item I put on the agenda because our representative at the Capital Planning Task Force, Dee, sent me a note indicating that the task force had proposed a $5 million threshold policy for what are considered very large projects, which would fall under the rubric of projects that would be managed under whatever process the task force defines. And she had gotten some feedback from another member saying that they would encourage the finance committee to discuss whether that number
Well,
is within.
What would the finance committee think
What would
about
the
this?
yeah? What would the finance
So
committee
how did they
think
arrive at a
about that?
$5 million number? Was that, how did they?
Oh, this has been a big question since the beginning of this task force. What constitutes a very large project? So it's been going around for a while in terms of what concerns people have about defining it. And
Dee, can I interrupt you for 1 second? I just want to make it clear to the committee that this is one decision point within a draft proposal
exactly.
that will come out and be discussed at a public hearing on March
Second.
2nd.
March 2nd.
So we are talking about one item that was
Yep.
voted for a draft proposal, and there will be a public hearing on it. So go ahead. I'm sorry. I just
No,
thought I'd give some-
that's perfectly fine. There are a lot of things that are, out there that we're working on, but at the same time, it was very important to try to come to some conclusion about what's a very large project. So it was presented as a motion, and there was an amendment to the motion which failed. So what came up was that it was a $5 million, if a project is a $5 million project, then that constitutes a very large project. The other component of this was a concern about a multi-year project, one that just keeps going along. So what the other part of the motion was to address that, which was, and I'll read the definition for you of what we came up with. And I even have the backup sheets that show from our meeting. The definition of a very large project is a project exceeding a cost of $5 million or any project that has 2 or more phases wherein the sum of any 2 phases exceeds $5 million. Not cumulative, it's additive like that.
So are there any examples of $5 million projects or phased projects that cost
Well,
up
we
to?
do have
What,
that.
what historical experience are they basing this $5 million number on, if any?
I think that part of the issue was we had projects that do not exceed the levy limit. They're within the levy limit, but have grown and blossomed into these into seemingly large projects.
Mhm.
However, it's not just a chunk of money that's requested. It comes out over time.
Right.
So if you look at that blue sheet, you'll see that there is one project that actually exceeds $5 million in
Right.
terms of.
Which one was that? Do you
That's
remember?
Giroux.
That's
It
Giroux.
included $2.5 million
Right.
to acquire the land.
Right.
And,
Okay.
and part of my, it's a different topic, but, so anyway, it was to accommodate projects that might be like that.
I see. Okay.
So that's why the question of,
Can I ask what on something more fundamental? Maybe I missed it, but why is this an issue?
why is the definition an
I can
issue?
guess, yes, but
Well, I
maybe
think,
explain.
What happens if you're a large project?
Yeah.
Right, what's,
Why-
how,
why-
do-
What is the significance?
exact, what
I don't
happens?
know.
Oh.
But
Exactly, so I,
No, honestly, I don't know, because.
Well, can I just?
Terry wants to say something. Terry,
Carl,
let Terry,
she's the
Terry,
Please.
accountant of this, yes.
Terry, talk.
Although, yeah. This
Identify
goes back
yourself,
a
please.
ways.
Terry Ackerman, I'm on the Board of Select Board, but I'm just here observing the meeting. And,
You're also a member of the task force.
right, I'm on the Capital Planning Task Force. Part of the charge of the task force, talk about 3 types of capital projects. Okay, we have a pretty good system for what the superintendent does in terms of boilers, roofs, stuff like that, and the same with the town manager. Cruisers.
Police cars.
Yeah.
gun
Buses.
sites,
Right.
all that.
We all
Refreshing
have-
assets.
In the
No,
capital
we're calling that tier 1, and that's not part of our capital task force charge. Tier 2 is also really not part of it, but the dividing line between tier 2 and tier 3 is very iffy. We have to come up with a definition of where does tier 2 end and tier 3 begins. So one possible definition is, well, it's whether you have to go to a debt exclusion. One possible definition is it's a dollar amount. One is,
I'm sorry, what's the difference between tier 2 and 1 again?
okay, tier 1 is just within the budgets. Like
Your
food,
operating costs.
cruisers,
That's fine, yeah.
usually under $100,000.
Right.
Tier 2 is usually between something like 100,000 and a million, or maybe 3 million, or maybe even 5 million. So we're supposed to figure out where that dividing line is, and because our charge is only the highest dollar.
Very
the
That
low.
highest
wasn't,
tier
that
3.
wasn't defined.
Right, it's not.
So
really
you're trying to
defined.
define.
We have to define it, that's part of our
Okay,
charge. So that's
okay.
what this is all about.
Okay, and one of the ways to define it is by the dollar
Right.
amount.
Yeah.
One
And I-
is whether it's excluded debt or not. One is whether it's multi-year. There's a lot, okay.
Right. And I just want to make sure that you please come to the public hearing, because this is
Yeah.
when we're really going to figure it out, I think.
I think-
Something
I
out
think-
there about
Carl
capital
wants to-
planning,
yeah.
formerly employee of the state capital planning division, is that you're planning for the capital assets of the town, not just the capital expenditures, but the capital assets. And so sometimes the preservation of those assets requires, it's not going to be over $5 million, but you want to make sure that you're keeping those assets
Maintained.
there are significant expenditures, and so, to draw a hard line like that, I can understand, the computers, the gun sites, the police cars, all that sort of stuff, you don't
That's
really need
not
to do that. But this other thing where you're really talking about significant capital assets, like the townhouse, and it may be $300,000 that you have to spend to do and so if the purview, and I think there's no other town committee that has that, is to make sure that we maintain our capital assets and I would advise against trying to, draw a hard line between those.
I think we should come to the hearing on March 2nd
I think you
to,
should.
to let you know our thoughts, our collective thoughts, rather than,
Please do.
I think that would be the right forum.
I agree. Thank you.
Any other comments, Dee? Or anything else you want to
I
share?
was-
Terry did a pretty nice job there.
I think that Terry did a great job. And there's much more that the task force is working on. So I think that before, you can make several comments at the March 2nd, but I think it would also be a good listening opportunity because it's open to the public. It is a hearing. You'll hear what other people have to say. We have a meeting here scheduled on the 5th. So that any further comments, they are going to have email capability to submit additional comments after the hearing. So I think we have a couple of opportunities in which we can formulate any feedback.
Thank you. Okay.
You're welcome.
So that's, any further comment on the $5 million vote that was taken? No. Okay, so the next item is a new item for our agenda. We hope it to be a regular item, and that's a follow-up. We have a list, where is it? I think it was, I asked
It's in here.
Barry to include it, here it is. Dee very carefully went back through our minutes, and this is what it looks like for those
Good.
who are looking
Yep.
through their
Yep.
packet. Okay. So, I think that this is, the first one on the list is a John Hinkling request, and that is to schedule some sort of training session so we all get up to speed on ClearGov.
You know, John, we did have that.
Do we have that?
John Harris came.
So, yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I mean,
Okay.
ClearGov is not terribly complicated.
It isn't.
Okay, all right.
And really, all it takes is everybody to just take some time and play around.
I agree with you.
All right.
And so if everybody would do that,
Yep.
I've done a lot of it.
Yep.
Some people have also done some of it.
Okay,
And
so,
so I think if we can just leave it at that, if everyone
Okay.
go there, check it out, think about it,
okay.
that would be sufficient.
So I will remove that from next week's to-do list. Mr. Banfield, to get back to Ms. Hughes, this, I believe this has passed us by.
Yes.
So I think we're just gonna remove it and just call it a day. All right, so the, reviewing the tax bin, we have gotten a redistribution of the, we'll call it the debt mountain, that Ms. LaFleur has provided. She's done that in the last few weeks, last week or so. Yes? Okay, so that's a check.
Actually, this is sent to the select board. Was it sent to the select board?
The reason, to the select board.
So
Oh,
it's
you
a-
were at a select board meeting? Is that, I'm trying to think when,
Yeah, what,
when
this says
happened?
select board.
Yeah.
It's also new, because it says before their October 7th.
Yeah, so that's moot. That's moot.
Okay.
All right. A breakdown of proposed capital projects will be funded within the debt versus excluded debt. I think this is basically the same as the debt presentation that we were recently redistributed. Am I correct? Am I? No?
No, I think this was the town's
Breakdown.
capital plan. I think we have this. We have this. It
Oh,
is
this
the plan.
Oh, we've seen this.
the
Yeah,
plan.
we've seen this.
We've seen this.
Okay. All right.
So we have
So
it.
the next four come from our guidelines meeting with the schools. And I forwarded these to Dr. Hunter. And I'm hoping for some feedback on these, along with the ones from 11/21. So I sent an email to Dr. Hunter saying that these still require some follow-up. And so those are out via an email. The balance of the Muse Stabilization Fund. Carrie, have we done this?
As of FY20. FY20, thank you.
Okay, okay,
And that's right in the budget book, right? That was in the
Yes.
budget book.
okay, all right. Work with Deputy TM Hodges to make the town meeting, we've talked about, we talked about this again with him when he was just in.
We did.
So,
We did.
we'll see what the presentation looks like at the hearing.
At the
We'll
hearing.
see at the hearing, and. So the next two were in the email I sent to Dr. Hunter. Now, the next set were at a meeting I did not attend, but I got some to-dos. That's a really good one. I like that. Parshar will write a letter for Chair Banfield, but that did go out. To speak with Chair Banfield about approaching the moderator. I'm having coffee with the moderator at a TBD. I sent her an email.
Great.
So
Good,
that's-
good,
that-
good.
we're-
That's very good.
We're working on that. So the last two I think I've taken care of. And Carrie, that letter did that letter go out to the planning board that I had made some small corrections to Parshar's draft? If it hasn't, needs to. I think, I sent a copy to you, but I also CC'd Carrie, and I didn't have the address of the chair of the planning, ZBA, I think that was going, ZBA. I didn't have her address, I think. Anyway, It's done, but it may be in a,
Wait.
in a black hole.
I feel like we've skipped a few.
We did. That's because I went
Okay.
to the ones I was working
Oh,
on.
I
We need a
Okay.
column for who.
All right.
Yeah, we do.
Town meeting to discuss legal services budget. We had a nice discussion of that
We
at our
did.
last meeting.
That was fun.
Okay, very robust discussion. So I think we can take that one off. Briefings by applicants are completed.
That's right.
Oh, we do have one thing to talk about, and when we finish this little list, I'll go through that.
Was that town meeting, was that town hall?
Town manager to discuss legal services budget. Okay. Chair to invite the middle school building committee. I have done that, but that is currently TBD, and we will talk about that after the meeting. After this set of things. B was invitations for all the briefings. So we have tonight's,
We've queued up-
and then 3 more meetings where we're having people in. So
queued up
those invites are all out. I don't know if the tax thing, did we get something back from them?
Which tax?
From the TIF one. What's his name? Grantham. the
Walter
Grantham.
Ohanian.
Did he confirm that he'll be in? Okay, all right, so that's about the only thing I think that's outstanding at the moment is Walter Ohanian. Okay, the FinCom to reconsider revising and defining its debt policy. Now, Mary and I have had some emails about this, and we will continue to talk about it, but in the next few weeks, what I would like to do, and this is just a proposal at the moment, is for us to provide our 5-year tax projection, but also include one that shows what it would look like with the middle school debt at a minimum. We may have other things within 5 years that, we want to build a public safety building, we want to fix, however we want to cycle those, but.
But this was talking about something, I think, different. This was actually.
I wasn't at the meeting, so I'm just guessing.
You're right. This was actually talking about the policy that we have as far as 7 to 8% of our current.
Oh, okay.
The town
Our finance.
Right.
Yeah, it's a
So you're-
finance department
So
policy.
it does come into play when you're doing the 5-year tax projection, because if we're projecting taxes out 5 years, are we going to assume that this policy's, anyway, so it.
Yeah.
But it's different. So,
It's right in the document that we were just sent, the one with the warrant articles. There is a whole page that talks about the policy, and I thought I had copied.
it's page 43.
Is it 43?
Yep.
Oh, the budget book?
Yep.
The budget book?
Yep. And I'll have to say, I was a little bit confused about page 43, but I think that this is something that we should postpone until after we get through town meeting.
Okay, well, let's leave it on here then. We'll just leave it on. Most of these things we're taking off, but we
Yeah, this,
Why postpone it? Would it not inform?
Not this year.
okay, it will, I believe we're going to assume the current policy when we do our 5-year tax projection. So it will inform that, okay, where I'm not sure it always has, but it will. And when we do our debt projections, it will inform that. But as far as changing the policy, it's not our policy. So,
it's a town and a town manager's policy. We can comment on it.
and we might decide that it really is the job of the capital asset task force.
Okay, that's easy to do. No problem.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, the next one is kind of on me, and this is because Dick Jamieson cannot make 7:30 a.m. meetings for the retirement board or whatever this is, and John has gone to a few of them.
Yes.
And they are assigning a FinCom member as liaison observer. Oh, that's the school. What is this? Oh, this is for this is the middle school financial subcommittee. Is that what this is?
Yes.
I have a different outstanding one that's not on this list then, which is that I have a retirement board vacancy.
Yeah. So
So
they're going to come and present to us.
Well, we're going to talk about that, but yes, that's the plan.
No, I don't think that we did. We have an observer for the main committee, but they have so many subcommittees, and there was some discussion that it would be valuable for us, having a financial focus, to send somebody to their finance subcommittee where they're doing costing, they're doing, most of the grinding work of figuring out, like, how much is it gonna be the payback of a specific sustainability feature or something like that.
I think it's a lot of meetings.
It's just, they meet at different times, there's a lot of meetings, let's put it this way, there's a lot of meetings. So that it is, we'll keep that on there as a possibility. And we spoke about approaching the moderator and the letter that Parshar Ghost wrote for me while I wasn't here. To return back to what was I gonna talk about? The middle school C. There's a problem with the meeting, okay? I had asked the middle school building finance subcommittee chair, Tim Holt, to come this evening and visit with us. He was having either his knee replaced or his hip replaced, something. He's having surgery, could not do it, asked for a different date. I looked over our schedule. Next week, we have a very full agenda. We have the school presentations. It's a very busy evening. And that will take us some time. So if it was March 5th, it would be so late in the calendar that if we wanted information from that meeting to inform our 5-year tax projection, we would barely have time to model it or do anything with the debt projections that we want to include in that. So having an opening on the 20th, I thought, okay, we'll just have to use the 20th. So I invited him for the 20th and he accepted it, which was fine. But today I got a message from Lori Hunter that that's school vacation week. She and Jared are both on vacation. Jared's on vacation. She would come in from vacation if we really, really must meet on the 20th. But she would really prefer not to be doing it. She also feels as though it's possible that some of the middle school building committee members who may also want to attend would not be able to make it because they may be on vacation. So she was asking for some leniency, asking for the 5th of March. I just don't think it's viable to have that meeting be useful to us if we meet on the 5th of March. Because I think that if we're going to try to include some information in the Finance Committee report that is somewhat speculative, but at least informs them that this is coming, that there's a debt mountain coming your way, we need that information earlier than the 5th of March. So it's a...
That was the purpose of the meeting, so that's why I'm a little bit confused. I thought we really just wanted to kind of,
Get to know you kind of
have a,
thing.
hey, we're here as a reason.
Well, he deferred me, he said I can send seconds, but he said it would be valuable for us to defer anyway because we are going to have crisper financial information that we could share with you if we were able to come on the 13th or the 20th or something like that, which is another reason that I deferred. He was willing to say, okay, even though I'm the chair, I'm having surgery, I can send other people. But he really thought it would, in the email I received from him, he went on about how they were going to get certain estimates back in the next week after that, after tonight, that would be helpful and instructive to us. So he deferred for not just his own surgical, reasons, but he thought that we would be we would enjoy getting the finances, which is what we're all about. So, are we on for a marathon meeting next week where we have the schools and we also bring in the middle school? What do we want to do about it? Or do you want to just have them send us stuff? I mean, I just really don't know how to
I think it's
respond.
important.
I'm with Christine on this. I thought the purpose of them coming in was more of a get to know you, kind of, hey, what are you guys
Well, there was
doing? And oh, by the way, here's some information that might help you guys frame the cost that you're going to be proposing in the overall context of the town debt, not just for this town meeting moving forward. That's all that was.
so to get them sort of on the same page with us.
Yes.
was the-
Or also,
Right.
Well, yes,
Right.
yes, yes.
Without any preconceived notions of where they're going.
I wasn't gonna ask you for a number.
Exactly.
Well, they're willing to share if they could get another week of,
I
work.
think the sooner we establish a relationship, the
Right.
better. And even if
Yeah.
they're in here for 30 minutes without numbers,
Right.
of laying out the schedule, what they're up to, maybe they have round numbers, but at least that collegial relationship, I think, is what
Right.
we're trying to do.
And if I would do it the way they wanna do it. So if they said, I wanna have these people there, and it's important for us to have those people
Yeah,
there,
right.
then I'd wait for that meeting, I guess is what I'd say. I want them to be
All right.
comfortable, I don't want them to feel rushed or.
All right,
you know,
we
that's
will
what I
do
would
our
say.
best with trying to get them to provide any kind of internal financials ahead of that get-together. Just so that if I work with Mary and we're trying to figure out a way to represent the debt ahead in the Finance Committee report, then we're gonna need to plug something in there.
But we already have a number, right? We know it's $100 million bill.
Yeah, that's kind of the working number right now.
I thought it was 80 to 100.
It was 80 to 100.
It was,
80 to 100.
it was,
How about doing this? If you bring them in.
well,
80 to 100,
it just
then
went
it's
up to 100.
Right, yeah.
It was 80 to 100, I thought.
If we bring them in on the 13th with no expectations around numbers, start that relationship, Bob. They've got a couple more weeks to refine whatever they're gonna do, and then they can send it to you via email, and we can make it in that way, but at least just start the relationship off. Right? That was the purpose.
To me, the extra week to have them in on March 5th for that kind of discussion doesn't matter that much. But if I send Tim a note and say, when you have this information, could you just please forward it to me? I'll be happy to send it out. There are two things that I've seen. I didn't bring my copy, I don't think, that I've seen that they have done. And their owner's project manager has gone back through the MSBA financials website for all MSBA projects in the last 10 years. They have normalized the construction costs to construction costs as they would be for us if we were to start in 2021. And they've normalized these older projects to those expected costs so that we could see what would it cost to build Cambridge's school on our schedule? What would it cost to build this, that, or the next? And they have at least 10 schools teed up in that spreadsheet. If I can get that, I'll send it to everybody, so we have a sense of what these things have been costing other towns. So why don't I do that? I will try to be a little more collaborative with Tim over the next 2 weeks, and we'll just push their meeting to March 5th. Does that sound, everybody?
If we're so loaded that night, like what's the harm in going to the 19th if it's just to establish a relationship? Because you said that we're gonna make them sit there sort of through all this just for.
The 5th is,
No,
what do you
no,
have on the agenda for the 5th?
It's not that
Didn't you
big.
say- oh, I thought you said-
No,
sorry,
it's the 13th that's very busy.
Sorry, okay.
The 13th we have 2 school budgets
Right.
to go over, and
Okay.
it's
I
kind of a
thought you
busy
said that. I
book.
apologize.
It's kind of,
Besides the two school budgets?
there's one other thing. I don't
We've
have
got-
it in front of me.
Article in the Minuteman.
Petition for the bus and Minuteman and,
The high school? Minuteman, Tyco High School.
yes,
Yeah.
and we've got the capital, the warrant article for the parking at the high school.
Parking, the parking.
And we've
So
got
the
the citizens petition for the 200 of free cash for the bus.
The operating budgets.
They're pretty well known.
Yeah.
They're still over by 97,000 at CPS, and they're holding the line. So, okay, we'll keep the 20th open. I'm gonna try to work on I had tucked in a few other items there to talk about the 5-year tax plan, so we'll have to figure out
Okay.
where we're gonna talk about that. I don't wanna talk about it on March 5th, that's just like 3 days before.
You wanted to put a list of assumptions together for the
Yes.
20th.
Yeah, exactly, I was gonna.
Can
bring
that wait till the 5th, or do we need?
No, I think that it would be better if it did not, because it does actually belong. in
Can we
the
do that
report.
electronically? Put together a list of assumptions and
well-
send it out? And
Send it out electronically, and then we'd have it
Sure.
for the
That's
next
what I said.
meeting, right?
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
I know
Well,
you said that. I was
yeah.
just reiterating it.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we're gonna, the last 2 times that we have voted, we've gone through what we'll call the assumptions memo for the 5-year tax projection. It has been a very chop, oh God, we've got 5 minutes, or we did it at the end of a public hearing one year, where the public hearing ended, we had a 5-minute meeting, oh yeah, we approve of all these assumptions. I think we should spend a few more minutes on that this year, mostly because I think it deserves more than.
So you want to do it in a meeting?
I want to do it in a meeting.
So
Yeah.
is March 5th too late?
I think March 5th can work. I think
Okay.
We can probably
Okay.
get it done. if we do it
Okay.
on March 5th.
It goes in the,
It goes in the FINCOM report.
And what's the drop dead date for that?
Carrie, the drop dead date for the FinCom report, it's just after the 5th meeting. It's like a few days after that. It might. It is. Yeah. Oh, that's true.
Everything's late.
Yeah, okay. Oh, all right, then that's fine. We'll do it on the 5th. We'll do it on March 5th. We'll do those. It was just like that memo that we produced that
Yep,
has,
yep, yep.
different assumptions.
Yep.
Hopefully it's got better assumptions.
Well, we don't know. All right, what do we have? What's left here? What are we doing here? Chair's report. So, I neglected, sadly, to bring my notebook in which my meetings with the select board and what's on there juggling. Without that, my memory is pretty much shot. So, I don't have much of a chair's report. I have a chair's breakfast next week, and you went to the chair's breakfast last month, so
That's old news.
That's old news.
It's old news.
Okay, so a few things, since I'm going to segue immediately to observer reports. The school committee met last week, and they basically are standing on their budget, which is $97,000 over our guideline. And Carrie sent out a distribution that looks like this. I think it's in our packet. And I'd like to talk about that briefly.
Yeah.
As part of that,
Good idea.
because I don't really fully appreciate how that interacts with their budgeting process. To be clear, the CPS budget is an expense-based budget. It does not incorporate potential revenue. There are some minor revenue items that they do list in their budget, but it's not the same as the CCRSD budget, which it not only has debt, but it also has OPEB and healthcare and revenue items. So Carrie sent us a note showing that there was going to be a significant increase over budget for the governor's budget on Chapter 78, and a small, it's a minor increase, but it's a significant percentage increase in charter school reimbursement, which totals $179,000 and change, almost $180,000 of new revenue that would really flow for the purposes of supporting education on the K-8 system. But those funds flow into the general fund budget as state revenue. They do not impact in any way the CPS budget. So I just wanted Carrie to give us some insight as to how the state wants us to represent that we are supporting our educational budget with the funds that they give us to support it. And since they flow into different accounting buckets, it's not obvious how that really works.
So the first thing that I want to say is this is the governor's budget, and the budget needs to go through both the House and the Senate, and it's likely not until the end of May at the earliest that the state budget would be resolved. So this is just to show you, we have to put revenue estimates together. Well, that's one of the first things we do when we put the budget together. We put those together in September. We have to be very conservative, just based on what we have currently listed as a total funding for the budget and the governor's budget. That's the
So,
difference.
Carrie, historically, does the governor's budget get passed? I mean, give me some perspective. How?
So the governor's budget is typically the lowest budget that is presented. So it usually goes up
So
somewhat
these are
once
pretty-
it goes through the House and the
Good.
Senate.
Okay.
They're pretty good numbers.
They're pretty good numbers.
There
That's what I
have
was
been
asking.
times in the past that the governor's budget was the high number, and what was approved was actually lower. But typically what you will see approved is higher. But it's probably not going to be much different for Concord.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of you know, this means that the state expects us to spend 100% of this money on education. So if we receive $3.8 million in Chapter 70, the state wants to make sure that we're spending $3.8 million on education, plus meeting our foundation budget. Though these are never issues in Concord. We're obviously spending, you know, we're spending $40 million on CPS, roughly. We're spending at least 3.8, and we're well above our foundation budget. So there isn't any requirement that this additional aid that comes in, whatever it is, that it's also used to fund the school, but it doesn't mean it can't be used to fund the school. If there are no adjustments made to the budget, and this is the budget that is approved, or this is the state aid, what would end up happening likely is we would just reduce our property tax
Right.
estimate, assuming all of our other estimates we're still comfortable with, which I assume that we would be. So you're not required to dedicate this additional funding to education, but you're certainly not prohibited from taking this into account. And I think it's safe to take into account that we will receive a reasonable amount over and above what we've already projected.
The 97,000 that they're over doesn't account for this 198, or it does?
Well, so there's the rub. Their budget is an expense budget, and it doesn't have any tie to this revenue. So we made a recommendation of,
Recommendation not with the 198 in mind, obviously.
right.
Okay, so we can let them spend 97 over, knowing that we've got 100.
Well, the key thing has been the tax impact.
Right.
And we were trying to hit a certain percentage on the tax impact.
Right.
To whatever it was. So does this get us, you know, since they're over the guideline, we're probably not gonna hit that number that we were.
They're over the guideline, but in
But-
terms of the taxpayer source, but now we know they have 180 grand
Right,
more from the
right,
government.
exactly. So does this enable us to keep within the
I think
tax
it does.
increase
I
that we
think
look
it
for?
says
Yeah,
whenever you
okay.
have more government money.
90,
Yeah.
When you say they have more money, their operating budget doesn't actually benefit from this. The general funds that the town receives, it's fungible. In other words, the town receives this and puts it in the bank, and they run their budget. Now, their budget, we vote one number, and they manage all of that all of that number they manage, but this is not part of it. This is something that the state gives to the town, and the town puts it on the books.
But how
it-
does it
it-
offset their spending?
It doesn't really, and
It
Doesn't have to.
It enables us to not raise the taxes.
it enables us to not raise the taxes, but it doesn't affect the way in which they, in other
So
words.
they don't get this money.
Right, they do not. So they are, when we vote a budget for a school, it's this separation of powers, so to speak. We have to have hands off because they don't want government to be meddling in curriculum or other kinds of stuff. So we just vote a big number and the school committee manages that number. But the fact that more of this came in doesn't give them more money to manage.
But they're already taking more money.
They're
than
taking
we
more
want.
money than we asked them to ask for, so.
So this may be.
Well, we don't
allows us-
we don't okay anything, we just recommend.
Yes.
Right, that's
Yes.
correct, that's
Said
correct.
that the government would expect you to spend it on education, so who's gonna spend it? The town isn't gonna spend it. right?
Well, this is where I said it's very fungible. The state has a thing called a foundation budget. It basically says you have this many students, you must spend this much money on education. That is the bare minimum that you must spend. We will give you this much money to make sure you spend the foundation budget. Well, we spend way in excess of the foundation budget, so it's a non-issue. It's just a non-issue.
And also, when we go to set our tax rate, we will include 100% of what our state aid is as our state aid. And
That's
right,
right.
and then, so 100% of whatever comes in for Chapter 70
Yep.
is going to be used. And we would reduce property taxes if there were no
But we are not,
additional
when this
expenses.
state aid is now, appears to be greater, it doesn't mean that they have more money to work with. They just have what we vote at town meeting as the number that they will ask
But
for.
they're already grabbing more than our previous guideline.
They are
They're asking for more than our pre,
guideline.
but,
So
but,
we could raise the guideline and still keep within the tax.
exactly, exactly.
If we wanna give.
We don't know what they're gonna come in the room with, do we?
Well, you
And
were at,
we-
you were
they-
at the.
Based on Tuesday's meeting, they're not really gonna move. They're not gonna move.
So just one other thing, that the state law requires us to publish in the budget what the school committee votes for the budget. So that is in the warrant, I'm sorry, I
Right.
said in the budget. So that's already published in the warrant.
It was last year as well. We had this gap last year when the,
And it will probably get voted at town meeting too, so. Why go through the grief?
what, they what?
Was it last year or maybe the year before? Last year, didn't they work it out with us?
They did,
That's what I thought.
they did, but it was published that we were still, we had a gap.
But at the end.
But at the end, they came in at
the
guideline, at guideline.
It's because it's this number or any other number below this number, is the way that the
So-
warrant gets written.
So do we have a decision to make, or was this?
We don't really have a decision.
It
I
was
just
just-
wanted to understand how this money, like, comes to the town, and it doesn't really change their capacity. Does it change, does anyone think that it should change our position relative to their ask?
No.
Or should we?
No, I don't.
I don't, there's some, I don't, yeah,
Well,
so.
we will revisit the guideline
We will.
sometime before town.
I think it's next, is it next week? March 5th? Get a lot,
So they've said they're done, heads down, and they're 98K.
Yes, in 98K overage or whatever, 97 change. Yes. So,
well, not exact, I mean,
anyway.
they said, that's what they said the other night.
Right.
Sorry?
That's what they said the other night.
Right.
But as I said, last year, we went to press. It's, yeah, it's still, I believe it's still in play.
All right, so.
Would anyone here vehemently disagree with my sense that they have a lot of flexibility, not only now with respect to ZBB, but with the timing of a lot of these decisions that they're making, and with the access to other accounts that they can transfer money from and to, et cetera, and that they sort of have decided to come in above the guideline, that it's sort of a decision? Would anyone have an opinion as to whether that's mistaken impression?
I agree that they have a lot of flexibility. I think they have a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, they do have a lot of
lot of-
flexibility. So in sense, they have sort of decided to come in above the guideline.
Well, like, everything is a
Yeah.
decision, John. I don't think there's any.
I'm just wondering if my sense is correct.
So if there's an implication that it was ill will, and I'm not sure I could say that
No.
without more facts or understanding the process. We all have to have trade-offs. So, just don't have all.
You know.
Well, no, I didn't say there's any ill will. I said
No.
that decisions were made, aware of the impact, I presume, and this is where it fell, and so this is, yeah.
I think there's room in the budget, is what I believe. I think there's a lot of, I think,
It's a little inflexible to me, their position.
we'll talk about this later.
They're, I think to a degree, it's as much about their political capacity to get a budget passed and the
Right, you're right.
fraction above the guideline that and the fraction above the guideline, if said in percentage terms, is quite modest,
It's also okay to agree to disagree.
Okay, so that's my observer report, and anyone else with an observer report?
Not me.
I do not have a, okay.
No.
Nothing to report.
No? Okay.
So Minuteman had their budget hearing on Tuesday, and they also had the school committee meeting, so their budget was, they approved their budget on Tuesday. It's slightly lower than what we had been working with, but they'll be here
do you have to adjust your numbers in your observer
I
thing?
do.
Okay.
I will. So now I have the final.
Yeah,
so
the final,
I'll
okay.
adjust it. It's not dramatically different, but it is a little.
Nothing to report for me.
Nothing new to report.
Okay. Finance Director, do you have any further report? No? Are there any citizen comments?
We do have 2 emails.
We probably should have a specific item on here, which is correspondence. Because,
Yes.
so
Yes.
we, just like we just added this
We
new
do.
thing, this follow-up
We do.
action items. We do have, and I have one that I brought, which we didn't cover last time. So, we have one from Ellen Emerson, who,
That's not in the packet.
who thanks us for our meeting the other week, and reminded us that the town has spent $855,000 so far on litigation. So that was one of our on the Estabrook litigation. We had another one from another citizen, Peggy Warglen. We are only CC'd on this, but she's concerned about the Board of Health and the impacts on
that's
local
right.
businesses that the tobacco product regulations are, and the litigation that would follow, and the cost of litigation, given the spend we've had
Does
on
the Board of
litigation.
Health have a legal budget? Are they under the town's legal budget?
They would be under the towns, they would,
Just under the town's legal
I
budget,
believe
right?
so, yeah.
I thought that, I thought Stephen said that legal expenses were billed out to the departments. Did I misunderstand that? No, I thought it was all the departments, but I might have misunderstood.
So he did say that certain legal expenses are billed out, and typically what we bill out are labor counsel for contract negotiations. But for general matters,
Yep.
they at least start in the general legal services budget.
Okay. So the other email that we had, and this goes back to last week, and I didn't have a chance to cover it last week. Phil has sent me a note saying that he has teaching commitments for all the Thursday meetings we have for the next 3 or 4 weeks. So he's not going to be able to make any of our meetings.
Oh,
But he had a couple of questions. One was about Grantham and Junction Village and what is the tax increment financing. We will cover that when they come in, so I'm not going to worry about that. And also, have we asked the town's law firm for a fee estimate? And I think we had at some point asked them for an estimate of what the costs were going to be.
For what?
But I don't, for the ongoing litigation,
Oh, okay.
for the ongoing Estabrook
Estabrook.
litigation.
We
But I
did.
don't know that we've
did.
received anything back for that.
So it certainly has been asked for, and it has been received by the town manager, but it's my understanding that that is a privileged document and is not being released.
Okay. All right. So the,
Stephen say that last time he came though, that the budget, the legal line item was increased to account for the
Yes.
estimated increase, like I
75,000.
said, that they'd adjust that.
Right, but we were asking for more.
Right.
We weren't asking for the whole budget line item. We were asking for specifically how much would Estabrook cost in the future.
so his other 2 questions were regarding Estabrook Woods. Is it correct that the town is changing its legal theory? And if so, what will be the financial impact? And the town manager last week was very clear that they weren't going to open the kimono at all regarding the legal procedures, so legal theories. So we aren't going to get anything on those questions. But I just wanted to make sure that Phil got his
That was good.
his questions asked. Are there any citizen comments?
Come on, citizens.
They're
They're not even listening.
No citizen, no citizen comments.
They're not even listening.
Come on,
Okay.
citizens.
Well, so you're in your
so
super
you're better
citizen
than
role.
citizen.
You have no citizen standing. Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Mike.
You got a question here?
So,
I have a clarification
oh,
question.
sure.
If the amount of, the estimated amount of the litigation is, that question is, if I understood Carrie, that's privileged, and so we're not going to hear any of that?
Right. The budget.
So if the request comes for additional money, as it has in the past for the legal under a special town meeting or whatever, what happens then if we don't have an understanding of where this is going?
Well, they have to, and they have made the case that we need to trust them and just give us the money. I don't have any other further explanation, Andrea. That's pretty much what we heard from the town manager at our previous meeting, is that you just have to trust me on this, trust us on
And
this.
how do we respond to the emails and the questions that people are asking the finance committee about?
Well, I think we're doing pretty well at, getting as much information, making as much information public as we can get made public. But it's not our role to pry between the client and the attorney in the case of the select board and the town council. We are not able to do that. Would you like to? Yeah. Yeah, it was quite something.
You should watch it.
You should watch it.
No, I know, but
Yeah.
I think you'll learn a lot. We talk a lot about it with Stephen.
Yes, you'll learn a lot.
I was just gonna offer, I wasn't at that meeting, obviously, and it was the town manager speaking on behalf of the town. Two things. One, obviously, if we reveal a estimate of litigation budget, that's revealing an entire
It's strategic,
litigation
yeah.
assumptions, and that's why it's privileged.
I understand.
But the other piece of which is that we don't control it. I mean, right now, where we are in the process is, at best 50-50 in terms of who controls how much money is spent.
So when we get questions, letters to the finance committee about it, do we put it back to the town manager? Put it back on the town manager and say, honestly, it's privileged information.
So
and
far, we have
can't.
been, I think we've been as responsive to the community as we can be. If someone were to send us a letter asking specific questions about litigation, our response can be, we don't know anything. I have, I've had to respond in a similar manner that we are, this is not something, please ask the select board. I have had to respond in that way, but it's rare. I mean, we don't have a flood of emails that are asking questions of that nature. So it's mostly,
They
yeah.
mostly wanted
No.
us
Yeah.
to help get more information.
Right.
They weren't expecting us to make a decision.
Exactly.
But it's the select board making
The type of mail that we receive, Andrea, is imploring us to sort of, peel stuff back and get, dig in and whatever. And I have to send very curt responses to say, it's not really our job. We're not going to do that. So it's not that we have not gotten answered questions we can't answer, that we can't make a reasonable answer for. So, and as I said, it's not a flood. It's not like there's a ton of them. So. Any other questions or comments? Then I'm looking for a motion.
Second.
Okay, all in
Good.
favor?
So no meeting